So these things called gifts actually come from a whole different dimension. And as we see a hand holding this glowing orb, it turns out they're actually blessings from the gods themselves. This blonde girl just sits there as feathers drift around her. But the thing is, everyone only gets one gift and they're all totally different. These powers let regular people do some pretty wild supernatural stuff, though it's not exactly fair for everyone. The narrator points out that these blessings definitely aren't equal across the board, and it's all split into 4 specific ranks. A few guys are just sitting around looking pretty miserable on the floor, while the lowest levels are basically just called incompetent or standard gifts. These guys clearly didn't get the lucky draw, but then you have the bloodline gifts that only show up in certain families. A girl with a spear walks through the smoke like it's nothing, and then there are the peerless gifts. These are one-of-a-kind powers that nobody else in the world has, which leads to a pretty messed up system where people without gifts are just seen as incompetent. This cloaked guy stands over someone crawling on the ground, and they even discard anyone they think has a shameful birth. Their lives are treated like they're worth nothing at all. The world is a mess because royalty and nobles are always trying to flex their power, leading to non-stop wars over who has the best gifts. The big nations just keep invading everyone else to stay in control. And it looks like it's never going to end back at a mansion. Some guy starts screaming his head off because he can't believe what he's hearing. Ars's father looks completely stressed as he asks if they're really saying his son has no talent at all. The person he's talking to explains that the kid only has a sensory gift called hearing, and when it comes to magic, he's basically got 0. The shrine maiden tells him the church never makes mistakes on these things. She knows it's a huge letdown, but it is what it is. Ars's father just stands there shaking. He can't believe the kid didn't get his talent or even his wife's. He slams his foot down in a rage, swearing because everything went wrong. The guy rants to himself about how he only wanted a perfect heir. He even picked a wife with insane talent just to make it happen. He starts panicking, saying they can't let this info get out. A weak kid would totally trash the family name and ruin his own career. Orpheus is losing it, clutching his head while wondering if they can even keep a secret this big. He honestly thinks it would have been better if the kid was never born. He stands there with his face shadowed, deciding right then and there that he's going to take action. Grabbing the door handle, he tells himself the kid is better off dead, since protecting his own status is the only thing he cares about. Inside the room, Ars's mother is glowing with happiness, holding her new baby and calling out to Orpheus to come see how perfect the kid is. Orpheus doesn't even look at her. He just grabs her arm and demands she hand the baby over immediately. He snatches the kid and starts walking away, saying he's going to dispose of him, leaving the mother on the floor, completely lost and asking why he's doing this. He turns back with a hateful look, yelling that the kid's gift is basically a joke, and he has no room in his life for a son with 0 talent. The mother looks absolutely terrified, unable to believe her husband is actually serious about throwing their son away just because of a gift. Orpheus shouts that a weak heir is a danger to their family name, while the mother tries to beg him to stop, but she starts coughing uncontrollably. She tries to call him back, but her strength is gone. She realizes her body is giving out at the worst possible moment, leaving her helpless to save her baby. Orpheus looks down at his wife, telling her she's too weak to be pushing herself right now. She's on the floor coughing, but he just tells her to stay put and be quiet as he prepares to. Ars is actually wide awake, his eyes snapping open as he catches everything going on around him. The mother desperately grabs Orpheus's leg, begging him to stop what he's doing, but he keeps moving anyway, leading to Orpheus clenching his fist. He thinks about how her pleading forced him to make a final choice. Right then, the story jumps ahead 5 years. Now there's a large stone tower standing tall under the clouds inside. A young Ars sits alone in a corner. He notes that because of his mother, his father didn't end up killing him instead. His father decided to hide him away from everyone, keeping him locked inside this tower behind a magic barrier. Ars touches his ear, thinking about how his hearing gift is really just having super sensitive ears. Since he can't use magic, he just sits there picking up every little sound. The heavy door to his room slides open, and someone finally steps inside to see him. It's his mother. She leans in with a smile, asking if he's been listening to the outside world again, and joking that she hopes he's not up to anything bad. Ars looks up with his eyes wide, calling out to his mother as she stands before him. He looks down at the floor, apologizing because he feels like there is nothing he can really do. But she just giggles and tells him she isn't mad at all, acknowledging how boring it must be for him to be stuck inside. She suggests they spend the day studying their letters, and Ars is all for it, happy to have something to do. Since his mother is usually pretty sick, he only gets to see her a few times a month, so he really treasures the days she feels well enough to visit him like this. Even when she can't make it to the tower, he knows she's always thinking about him, and thanks to his super hearing, he can actually tell just how much she worries about his life behind these walls. He watches her closely, thinking to himself that these brief visits are the only times he ever feels truly relaxed. Mother eventually calls it a day for the studying, but she notices him staring and asks if anything is wrong, though he just plays it off like it's nothing. Ars changes the subject, asking his mother if there has been any change in her health lately, and she looks a bit surprised, wondering if she actually looked pale enough to make him feel worried about her. Ars looks at her as she sits on the floor and explains it wasn't her looks, it's just that her heartbeat sounded different, and he shrugs it off, saying he was probably just imagining things since her heart is usually so weak it sounds like a tiny animal's. Hearing her heart compared to a small animal's makes her freeze up. She can't believe it sounds that weak to him. She manages a smile and asks if he can really hear things like that, admitting she isn't exactly healthy but feels fine, and tells him she's honestly just happy he cares enough to worry. But then she reaches for something, telling Ars she has a gift for him, which turns out to be a cross necklace. She tells him to give it to his father to help them finally make up, and winks as she says she put a spell on it, telling him to let his dad know she's mad until he finally listens to his son. Ars is left standing there, thinking the whole situation feels like some kind of magic or a curse, but his mother keeps going, saying it'd be wonderful if he and his dad could just make up so they could all finally go out as a family. She says that would make her really happy, but then she starts coughing pretty bad, and when she pulls her hand away, there's blood everywhere. It's clear she's way sicker than she's letting on. Ars sees the blood and completely freezes, barely able to get the word mother out because he's so scared. She tries to play it off though, apologizing and saying she's just a little tired, so she's going to head back to her room, and Ars just watches her go, telling her he understands and asking her to come visit him again soon. She gives him this really sad, weak look and tells him he needs to take care of himself. Then she puts a hand on his head one last time, telling him to stay well while Ars just stares up at her. Moving on, she leaves him behind, and the long hallway is totally empty. Back in her room, Philia sits on the edge of the bed and apologizes to Orphis, admitting her health is doing way worse than she thought. She looks pretty down, saying she really wishes she could have spent more time watching over Ars as he grows up, but Orphis just doesn't get it, asking her why she even bothers caring about the kid that much. He calls Ars a total failure of a son, saying he's been nothing but trouble since day one and doesn't have any real value. Orphis tells her to stop wasting her time on the kid and focus on herself, adding that he's saying this because he actually cares about her. Philia just gives him a little look and asks if he's actually feeling a bit jealous of his own son, but then she gets serious, telling him that whether someone has talent or not doesn't really matter to her. She puts him on the spot, asking if the only reason he cares about her right now is because she was born with talent, so Orphis gets flustered and tries to argue, but she cuts him off, telling him that if talent isn't the only thing he cares about, he needs to actually look at Ars. She tells him her life is so much better now because of the choice he made not to kill that child back then. Philia smiles softly as she calls out to Orphis, telling him his life is going to change and asking him to look after their son when she's gone. A few months pass by at the stone tower of the estate. Ars spots Orphis standing nearby and wonders why his father is even visiting him. But Orphis brings up Philia's dying wish, saying she wanted the kid to live a free life, which just leaves Ars completely confused. Orphis loses his patience and calls Ars an incompetent idiot, before bluntly telling him that Philia is officially dead. He explains that she died from her illness, leaving Ars shaking in total shock as he tries to wrap his head around the fact that his mother is gone. Orphis isn't finished though, yelling at the top of his lungs that he wants to be very clear about one thing. His views are not the same as Philia's. He makes it known that he has zero intention of letting Ars go free, and he'll use any means necessary to make sure that happens. Looking down at the kid collapsed on the floor, Orphis says he'd like to jump straight into magic development training, but he'll give Ars a little bit of time to himself just for Philia's sake, though he warns the kid he'd better be ready for what's next. The kid looks down with a single tear running down his face. Orphis takes him to a dark room and chains him to the wall, standing over him with a rod in his hand. Orphis asks if it hurts and tells him to hurry up and change his gift, saying he'll just use magic to heal any fatal wounds. The plan is to use extreme pain from the outside to force magic development, but trying to change a gift after birth is a forbidden art that's really nothing more than torture. Even if the person being put through it breaks completely, the gift itself is never going to change. Ars realizes that since his father lost his mother, he's just been obsessing over magic to satisfy his own ego. Sitting there in chains, Ars apologizes to his mother and decides he can never get along with his father. He knows there's something the old man doesn't realize yet. While his hearing gift used to be pretty basic, it completely changed when his mother died, and now he can feel his power evolving to a whole new level. Ars holds a small flame in his shackled hand, realizing that his hearing gift is way more broken than he thought. Anything he hears and learns, he can now copy perfectly. He clenches his fist tight against the metal chains, thinking about how he can even pull off magic now, so he decides it's time to start. Looking ahead with a dead serious expression, He makes a vow to himself to track down and gather every bit of knowledge in the entire world. He realizes the world is a massive place with endless things to learn, and instead of being overwhelmed, it just makes him want it more. So he starts listening in on every single sound he can catch. Magic really starts to fascinate him, especially since using it through his hearing gift means he doesn't have to follow the usual rules. Ars stands there in his chains as the power flows, knowing that as long as he hears about a spell, he can basically use it. On top of that, he's got a massive pool of mana that he hasn't even fully tested yet. It turns out he got that insane talent from his mother, Philia, who was actually a legendary mage before she passed away. Ars keeps his eyes locked forward, ready for whatever comes next. Ars sits there in his chains, wondering if 10 years have already flown by since he got locked up. It was actually a pretty useful setup for him, but he's definitely been stuck in here a long time. Looking back, he realizes he didn't even need to focus on magic, yet the isolation had some solid perks for his training. He spent all those years just focused on one thing, using his crazy hearing to listen in on every single sound the world could throw at him. Turns out, a prison cell was the perfect spot for someone like him because of how quiet it was. He knew that if things were too noisy, it would have just wasted his time and made his training way less efficient. But now, looking at a memory of his mom, he knows there isn't a single thing left that's keeping him tied to this place. Ars realizes his only real problem now is that he's never actually fought anyone for real. He's pretty sure he could wreck his dad, Orphis, but the world is a big place with plenty of unknowns. And since he doesn't know how strong people out there really are, he'll have to wait a bit longer to test his limits. It took a long time to get to this point, but he's actually hyped to see what's coming next. Just then, a guard with a stressed-out look on his face shows up at the bars and tells Ars that his meal is ready. Ars looks down at the single piece of bread on the floor and asks if that's really all he's getting. Orphis stands outside the bars and asks if he thinks he's in a spot to complain, calling him trash and a waste of space. Ars stays calm and just asks if this means they're finally done with all the magic development experiments. Orphis mentions it's been 16 years since Ars was born, and despite all his hope, Ars's hearing never showed a single reaction, so he's decided there's no point in continuing any of this. Ars leans back and asks if that means he's officially not needed anymore. Orphis just scoffs and tells him his brother got the bloodline gift, so he's the one chosen as the next successor. Ars takes the news well and simply asks what's supposed to happen to him now. His dad tells him he'll keep getting just enough food to stay alive, and that he'll let him go eventually, because that was the dying wish of his mother, Philia. Ars closes his eyes and takes a second to process everything, just saying he gets it now, but then he starts moving his shackled hands and says this actually works out perfectly for him. Orphis stands there and starts to freak out as Ars just stands his ground in the middle of the cell right before the heavy metal chains holding him just snap like they're nothing. Ars casually rubs his wrist and tells his old man that today is the day they're finally parting ways. Then he turns toward the solid stone wall and says it's time to go. He puts his hand against the bricks, and a massive magic circle starts glowing with crazy power, unleashing a move called Wegblason Impact that sends magic and debris flying everywhere. The entire side of the stone tower just explodes outward, leaving a huge hole in the wall, and Orphis can't even finish a sentence. His hand just shakes while he watches his son's power. Orphis is completely losing it, saying this is impossible and asking if that was actually magic. But Ars just stays cool, looking down and telling him he's exactly right. Ars stands at the edge of the wreckage and mentions how his father deemed him incompetent, explaining it's actually hearing magic, though even he admits the power was way more than he expected. He figures the barrier his father put on the tower must have just gotten weak over time, which makes Orphis freak out even more because he literally just had the barrier redone yesterday. But Ars doesn't care, saying there was probably just a flaw in the spell. Closing his eyes for a second, Ars says there is absolutely nothing left for him to learn at home, since he's heard stories about someone out there who is even stronger than the demon lords. He calls this person the quintessence of magic and says he's going to find the true essence. So while Orphis yells for him to wait, Ars just leaps out of the giant hole in the wall. Orphis stands there with his jaw on the floor, sweating and looking completely wrecked by the shock, looking down at the spot where Ars was standing. He can't believe his son just vanished into thin air like that. He leans against the broken wall, repeating the kid's words about finding the true essence of magic, and further away in the middle of a thick forest, things are getting pretty intense. Someone is hauling it down a dirt path, running so fast they're barely touching the ground, and it turns out to be a night girl who is totally out of breath, gasping for air as she clutches her arms. She looks pretty stressed out, muttering to herself that she just needs to get her gear off, but then she lets out a loud scream as she hits the ground hard. Looking up from the dirt, she's completely confused and asks herself what the hell is even going on as she realizes that whatever just happened to her was definitely the work of some kind of magic. A heavy armored hand reaches out as a voice calls out to Princess Yuria. She freezes up, realizing the people chasing her have already caught up. 5 hooded knights stand in her path, and the leader acts surprised to see her in a place like this. He laughs right in her face, mockingly asking if she's just out for a little stroll. Yuria tries to keep her cool, telling them she just wanted some fresh air after being locked up for so long, but the guy's face goes totally dark, losing that fake smile instantly. He offers a half-hearted apology for being rude, but tells her she's had her fun and it's over, reminding her that she's already wrecked a bunch of their mages just by resisting them. He tells her to give up the fight and go back to being their prisoner, and it's a tough spot, especially since her hands are still locked tight in heavy metal shackles. The lead hooded knight stares her down, telling her that taking her back to the capital is a direct order from the emperor. He warns her that if she keeps acting up, they're going to stop being polite, and Yuria can only look away in cold sweat. Yuria tries to snap back, asking if this is what he calls respect, and threatens that they'll pay if she gets even a single scratch. But the guy just clicks his tongue, looking at her with total annoyance, reminding her that magic can heal any injury anyway, which makes her completely freeze up on the dirt. He leans in and tells her that since they can just heal her up, they're more than capable of doing whatever they want to her, claiming they're focused on the mission for now, but leaving the threat of what they could do hanging in the air. As the knights keep her pinned, the leader casually wonders how the other squad is holding up, and looking at her face, it's clear Yuria has reached her breaking point. She finally gives up and says she'll stop resisting, just asking them to take the vines off her legs so she can walk back on her own. The leader says he's glad she's finally listening and tells his guys to drop the magic. One of them follows the order immediately while the lead knight gives a mock bow, apologizing for not introducing himself earlier. He starts telling her his name is Rek and that he's the commander of this squad. But right then, he gets absolutely blasted in the face before he can even finish his sentence. One of the other knights watching from the side just stands there in total shock, screaming out for his commander as Yuria follows through on a massive kick that sends Rek flying back. She looks at the rest of them with a smirk, throwing his own words back at him, asking if injuries don't matter since magic can just heal them anyway. Rek pulls himself up with blood pouring down his face, completely losing his cool and shouting for his men to pin her down. The knights jump on her all at once, forcing her down into the ground as she struggles to move, and Rek looks like he's ready to kill, growling that he's just going to chop off their limbs and drag them back by force. Rek wipes the blood from his face, growling that they can just use magic to heal everyone once they get back to the capital, but one of his men looks worried, asking how he's going to explain this mess to Lord Albert. Rek isn't sweating it, saying Albert won't catch up to them before they reach the city since he's busy meeting with a noble. And he makes it clear that as long as their prisoners stay alive, he doesn't care how much they get hurt. He suddenly freezes up as a shadow moves past him faster than he can react, while Yuria is caught in the middle of it all, closing her eyes and shouting for someone to help. Just like that, a hand reaches out and snaps the steel blade of the sword right off the hilt, leaving Rek staring at his broken weapon in total shock, barely able to get a word out. Ars stands there looking casual, looking down at the broken metal and joking about how fragile swords are before looking the knights in the eye, saying he's sorry for the interruption, but he's got some questions for them. Yuria looks up in total disbelief. Her eyes are wide and she's sweating as she tries to process what just happened. Rek is fuming, standing there with his snapped blade and demanding to know who the hell this guy is, while Yuria just stares at Ars, unable to believe that this random person actually stepped in to save her life. Ars looks completely relaxed, telling them that since they're so interested in his name, he'll tell them he's Ars. But Rek isn't having it, spitting blood as he asks if Ars was the one who broke his sword and warning him that he clearly doesn't know who he's messing with. Ars doesn't look impressed at all, casually calling him a Sir Magic Knight of the Earth Empire. And then he really lays into them, calling the whole group a bunch of idiots for ganging up on a single woman. Rek's face twists in pure rage as he calls Ars a little shit, and he loses it, swinging whatever is left of his weapon while Ars just stands there looking bored. Ars notes that even though he talked big, he's heard that the magic knights from the Empire are supposed to be geniuses. Ars looks totally chill, mentioning that while this is actually his first time trying this magic on a human, he moves his hand toward the guy's face faster than anyone can react. He calls out the spell Wegblason Impact, and a massive burst of pressure slams into Rek, sending him flying, and Yuria just stands there with her jaw dropped, wondering how he managed to pull off that kind of magic without even saying a chant. Rek hits the ground like a sack of bricks, leaving a trail of dust behind him. Ars looks over at the guy slumped against a tree and starts to feel a little bad, asking if he actually killed him, since he honestly thought the knight would be able to deflect it. considering it was the weakest spell he's got. The other knights start panicking about the lack of an incantation, but one of them yells for everyone to stay calm as they try to analyze his power, figuring it's wind magic and telling each other they won't lose since they still have the numbers. Ars sees them getting into their stances and figures since they're on guard now. He'll just wipe them all out with one big area spell. Ars holds his hand out as a dark, complex magic circle appears. He calls out the spell Shrekken, Shadow Terror Quake. The ground starts to feel weird, and one of the knights realizes this is nothing like the magic from before. He starts panicking, wondering if Ars is actually using a completely different magic attribute. Yuria is totally caught off guard, sweating as she tries to figure out how he has more than one gift. Ars just stands there with his hand out. For a second, the knights think nothing is happening and assume he messed up. One guy starts talking trash about being scared for nothing, thinking the spell misfired right before blood starts leaking from his eyes and nose. Ars stays completely calm while the entire area begins to rumble and shake under their feet as the knights collapse. He explains that this magic is meant to amplify their fear and dull their judgment. He tells them he's shaking the ground to distract them while the spell attacks their brains through their eardrums. Ars admits it's actually a simple spell to counter with defensive magic. He just figured they would have blocked it by now. Ars tries to get a word in, but he quickly realizes the knights are so far gone they can't even hear him. He starts feeling a little weird about his own power, mostly because these guys were so weak he can't even tell how strong he's actually gotten. Turning his attention away from the mess, he looks over at Yuria and decides it's time to move on. He walks over to where she's sitting and tells her he's going to break those cuffs off her right now. Yuria tries to warn him that a high-level A-rank mage made them, but Ars just brushes it off, saying he already knows the trick to it. He casts a spell called Sound of Death, and a magic circle pops up, shattering the restraints instantly. Yuria just stares at her hands in shock, unable to believe he can do chantless casting and use multiple gifts at once. Ars has to snap her out of it, apologizing for the interruption but pointing out that they really need to leave before anyone else shows up. She jumps a bit and quickly agrees, still looking pretty flustered by everything. As they start heading out, she stays quiet for a second while they walk, eventually finding the words to thank him for saving her. Yuria looks pretty concerned and points out that those men were actually magic knights from the Earth Empire, so messing with them is going to cause a massive amount of trouble for his friends and his family. Ars just looks at her and tells her she doesn't need to worry about any of that, making Yuria ask what he could possibly mean. He looks down and starts explaining that what happened to him is actually a pretty common story. He talks about a noble family that had a kid born with a totally useless gift. The dad wanted him gone, but his mom begged to keep him alive, so they just kept his existence a secret from everyone. Once his mom passed away, his dad tried to force him through magic training to see if anything would happen, but it was a total bust. The second his dad remarried and had a younger son with a real gift, he decided the first kid was trash and threw him away. Ars closes his eyes and tells her that's the kind of place he comes from, and since his past is a mess like that, he doesn't have any family or friends left for the Empire to go after. Yuria looks at Ars with a lot of concern and tells him that since he's all alone, he has even more reason to be careful. She asks him to please start taking better care of himself. She points out that what he's doing with magic development is actually a huge taboo and strictly forbidden, so he really shouldn't be wasting his time worrying about other people right now. Yuria looks down and tells him he must be a really kind person, admitting it's been a long time since anyone bothered to care about what happens to her. Ars just gives her a warm smile and says he was actually just happy to see her get so mad for his sake. He looks pretty relaxed about the whole thing and tells her she really doesn't need to stress over his situation. Moving on, Ars holds his hand out and mentions that he hasn't even given her a proper introduction yet. He says he might have mentioned it earlier, but tells her again that his name is Ars. Yuria gets a serious look on her face and starts to introduce herself in return, saying her name is Yuria, specifically Yuria de Verut. Ars hears the name and stops to think, remembering that Verut was actually the name of one of the countries the Earth Empire wiped out a while back. Ars realizes Yuria is being hunted by the Earth Empire and that she's using the name Verut, which means he notices the crest on her gear and starts wondering if she's actually related to the royal family. Ars asks if he should just call her princess, which makes her blush as she says she isn't sure if that title still fits her. He brings up how she was tied up and held prisoner, saying it's honestly impressive she found a way out, but Yuria just looks away and admits she was lucky to get away, though there's more to it. She thinks back to being captured and tells him she really doesn't want to talk about that part of her past. Ars catches the vibe and says they should probably just focus on getting out of the area as fast as possible. Yuria asks where he was even planning to go in the first place, and he tells her he was originally heading for the Magic City. She seems pretty surprised to hear that, repeating the name of the city to herself while the place is revealed as a massive city that's completely governed by the Magic Association. The Magic City is a massive fortress that keeps to itself. It stays away from outside drama and keeps its own culture alive. People call it the center of the world, mostly because it's the one spot where the best magic and gifts all end up, and Ars admits there's someone he's been wanting to meet there, and honestly, he's just always wanted to see the place. Yuria takes a sudden step forward, looking like she's made up her mind about something. She asks if she can tag along with him, which catches Ars off guard. He double-checks if she really wants to go all the way to the Magic City. She looks a little embarrassed, but explains she was actually already planning to head that way herself. Yuria gets serious, reminding him the Earth Empire is hunting her and wondering what would happen to any place that gave her shelter. Ars doesn't sugarcoat it. He says any country that takes her indefinitely wouldn't get off easy, so he points out that she can't just ask for asylum anywhere, and Yuria looks down, knowing he's right. Ars thinks for a second and says she'd probably be safe in the Magic City since it's neutral territory, but there's still a problem. Ars officially invites Yuria to join him on his journey, but she hesitates and asks if he's really sure about taking her along. He just shrugs it off, saying a travel buddy is always good and it sounds way more fun than traveling solo. Yuria stammers out a thank you, adding that she actually knows some people there and can show him around once they arrive. Ars decides it's time to move out, and Yuria figures they're about a day's walk away from reaching the Magic City. She looks hyped to finally be getting started and heading out. As they walk, Yuria remembers the magic he used during the fight and mentions how impressive those spells were. She gets curious and asks him what kind of gift he actually has, but Ars immediately goes quiet. He looks pretty awkward and starts breaking a sweat. Yuria notices the vibe change and worries she asked something she shouldn't have, though Ars quickly tells her it's nothing like that. She decides to let it go, but she's still clearly wondering what the deal is. Ars finally comes clean and tells her his gift is just hearing. He looks totally exhausted just saying it out loud. Yuria stands there looking confused, asking him to clarify if he literally just means his sense of hearing. She admits she's never even heard of a gift like that and doesn't know what to say, but Ars just says he figured she'd react that way. Yuria gets a thought and points out that he was clearly using magic back there, which Ars doesn't deny. He explains that while he started with just good hearing, at some point he just became able to use magic, and he doesn't really get it himself. He tells her he can even use magic types that shouldn't be part of his gift, leaving Yuria to realize that nobody actually knows how his magic system works. Ars looks down, muttering about how his hearing gift is basically worthless in this world. Yuria looks at him and asks if he really believes that, because she thinks it's actually a gift people would be pretty jealous of. Ars just shrugs it off, saying the only thing it's good for is eavesdropping on people. Yuria hears that and realizes it's definitely not something he should be bragging about. Yuria looks at Ars with a kind expression, starting to say something else as she tells him that the reality is his power saved her life. She really thinks it's a gift he should be proud of. Ars looks down with a small smile, staying quiet while he processes what she just said. Ars eventually says that's enough talk about him. He turns the question around and asks Yuria what her gift is, catching her off guard. Yuria closes her eyes and smiles, explaining that her magic affinity is the white light. Ars starts to stumble over his words trying to figure out how to respond. Yuria notices and jokingly asks if he thinks it doesn't fit her. Ars takes a second and tells her that it actually sounds like a gift perfectly suited for a princess. Yuria looks at him with a blush, saying she's honestly really happy to hear him say that. Ars thinks to himself about how he's heard the light gift is incredibly powerful and completely unique in this world, and he still can't really wrap his head around the fact that he met someone who can use it way out here. Yuria admits the idea of seeing his magic really piques her interest, so Ars tells her he'll have her show off her own skills next time, but she just manifests a ball of light and says she's down to show him right now. Ars scratches his head and reminds her that using bright magic out in the open is basically just asking for the enemy to come find them. Yuria just winks and teases him, asking if he'll be the one to protect them if that actually happens. Ars gets this look on his face like he's totally over it, saying he never wants to deal with a hassle like that again. Yuria can't help but giggle at his reaction, admitting that what he's saying is probably true as the two of them keep moving, walking further down the dirt path through the woods. Ars notices the sun is going to be setting soon and suggests they take a break right there. They should rest up a bit before making the final push for the border. The sky starts getting dark as the sun drops behind the trees, but just as they're settling in, a massive blade slams into the ground right in front of them with a heavy thud. Yuria looks completely shocked and yells out Ars's name because Ars has this dead serious look on his face while he pulls out a large blade, but it turns out he's just getting ready to prep some food. Yuria insists on helping out, but when Ars asks if she's talking about the people they're avoiding, he tells her not to worry about them and holds up a carrot and a cleaver. He explains that traveling is really just all about give and take, so Yuria tells him they can't just let him handle every single thing himself. Ars looks a bit skeptical and asks her if she's actually any good at cooking, and she gets all excited, claiming she's great at making sweets and to leave it all to her. Ars isn't totally convinced, but he tells her he'll let her take the lead as she tells him to let her handle the fire too, saying she's heard stories about how it's done. She sounds a bit hesitant when she calls his name, and when Ars asks her what's wrong, he has to point out that she's just holding a fork and a knife. Those definitely aren't going to start a fire for them. Ars just stands there staring at her, looking like he's completely lost all hope in her survival skills. Ars looks pretty confused and asks if that's really how it is because Yuria holds out some stones and explains that one of them is the flint, making Ars realize he was just holding a regular knife and fork the whole time. He looks at the fork in his hand and asks her if she didn't even use stuff like this when she was a prisoner, but he mentions that back in his own cell, they only ever gave him food he could eat with his hands. Yuria starts walking over, saying she needs to learn how to do these things, even if she isn't sure how she'll manage it yet. She stands there with this super serious look on her face, like she's really feeling for him. Yuria starts to say something, but Ars interrupts and asks if she wants to try lighting the fire together. So she says excuse me and scoots right up behind him to help out. They work on it for a bit until a bright flame finally catches on the wood. Yuria tells him he can ask her for help whenever he needs it, and Ars thanks her, saying she's actually pretty good at the whole fire starting thing. Yuria looks down with a small smile, admitting that she actually wasn't any good at this when she first started, but she explains that she had a maid back home who was an expert at these things and ended up teaching her everything. Ars looks her over and mentions it's pretty clear the princess has picked up some real experience along the way, which Yuria confirms with a confident nod. Ars gets a bit of a cold sweat, figuring she must have gone through some brutal training to get this skilled, especially since he's picturing her maid being a total drill sergeant. Yuria just smiles and says the maid was actually a really kind person, just like Ars is, so the training wasn't a big deal. She moves over to the food supplies and says she'll get started on the meal, while Ars tells her he's excited to see what she's got. He watches her work, she's handling the knife with zero hesitation and moving through the prep work with crazy efficiency. Everything is looking pretty promising so far, but as Ars watches her, he starts thinking back to something that happened earlier. Yuria brings up how surprised she was when he touched her restraints, mostly because there was active trap magic set on them. Ars mentions he probably could have just broken the magic too, but for some reason, the spell felt totally brittle and just snapped. Ars asks Yuria if she messed with the magic restraints earlier. She looks away and admits she tried to break them herself a bunch of times, which Ars realizes is exactly why the trap failed. He explains that she damaged them so much that the magic couldn't even trigger properly, making him admit that the whole situation was way too stressful for his heart. Yuria looks a bit embarrassed and tells him she'd appreciate it if he gave her a warning next time, so she promises to do her best from now on. Ars just gives her a look and says it would be even better if she just didn't get caught by the enemy again, but Yuria just laughs it off and agrees that he's got a point. She gives him a big smile and repeats that she's going to give it her all, then she heads back to the cooking pot. A little while later, she lifts the lid and cheerfully announces that the food is finally ready. But when she asks him what he thinks, the pot is filled with a bubbling purple mess that looks pretty suspicious. Ars just stands there looking completely horrified at the meal she just made. He asks her if she actually knows how to cook at all. Yuria gets all flustered and confesses that her maids always did the cooking, so she just assumed she could do it after watching them once or twice, leaving Ars trying to be a good sport about it. He figures maybe it's just some fancy style that looks bad but tastes fine, so he picks up a piece to give it a shot. Ars looks at the dark, dripping chunk of food on his fork and can't even figure out how it ended up like this. It looks less like a meal and more like some kind of dark magic ritual gone wrong. Yuria sits by the fire looking totally defeated, apologizing for the bubbling purple mess in the pot, while Ars actually goes for it, taking a bite of the suspicious food without even hesitating. He looks at her with a smile and tells her it's actually not bad at all, insisting it's delicious and that they should eat up before it gets cold. So Yuria looks at him in total shock, asking if he's actually serious about that. Ars just shrugs it off and says he really does like it. She gets all choked up and wipes away a tear, telling him thank you for being so nice about her first attempt at cooking, but as soon as she tries a spoonful herself, she looks like she's about to die while Ars just keeps eating like it's a 5-star meal. It doesn't take long for the reality of the taste to hit her. Yuria ends up face down on the ground in total defeat. Ars stands there holding his bowl, sweating a little as he watches her struggle with her own cooking. Yuria looks completely pale and sick as she tries to change the subject, asking what he plans to do once they reach the Magic City, though Ars is more worried about whether she's even going to make it there after eating that stuff. Ars looks a bit worn out as he explains his plan to take things easy for a while, though he mentions he'd like her to show them around the city since he's curious if her contact is in the magic city that connects to Virut. Yuria looks much more relaxed now, just sipping her drink while she explains that the person she knows is actually her younger sister, who ended up starting her own guild right in the heart of the magic city. Ars checks to make sure they're heading straight to that guild as soon as they get into town, and Yuria confirms that's the plan, admitting they're going to have to rely on her sister quite a bit once they arrive. Ars takes a drink and thinks about the two of them, an older sister with the light gift and a younger sister with her own power, which leads him to ask if the sister has a rare gift too, before remembering that Karen's power is actually fire. It turns out her gift is like a top-tier version of the usual flame and fire bloodlines, making both of these sisters pretty incredible. Ars stares off into the distance, finally realizing why the Earth Empire is so obsessed with coming after them and won't just leave them alone. Yuria looks toward the horizon and mentions they've only ever sent letters back and forth, so she's really excited to finally see Karen in person. Ars mentions he'll make sure to stay out of the way during her reunion, but Yuria just smiles and tells him he wouldn't be an interruption. She's really excited to see Karen again, but she's just as hyped to officially introduce Ars to her sister when they finally arrive. Ars says he feels the same way and is definitely looking forward to meeting her, so he decides it's time to wrap things up and get back on the trail. Since they're done eating, Ars suggests they get moving and save the resting for once they've actually managed to cross the border. Yuria agrees with him, noting that they're still deep in enemy territory and need to stay sharp until they're safe. Ars catches a glimpse of her gear and gets a serious look in his eyes, noticing the sword she's carrying by her side, which makes him curious about something. He admits he's been wondering and asks Yuria straight up if she's actually pretty strong herself. Yuria looks back at him with a bit of a surprised expression and asks what exactly made him think that. Ars looks at the weapon Yuria is carrying and asks if that sword belongs to the guy he took down earlier, and he points out that since her restraints are finally gone, she can use her gift again. Plus the fact that she's carrying a blade must mean she knows her way around one. Yuria doesn't say anything at first, just offering a small smile. She tells him he hit the nail on the head and admits she's actually pretty talented when it comes to swordplay. Looking back on when she was a prisoner, she explains that her gift was being suppressed and her weapon had been stripped away. But she's certain that if she'd had access to even one of those things, those guys never would have caught her in the first place. Ars asks if she's really that confident in herself and says he's actually getting pretty hyped to see what she can do. He's got this look of total expectation on his face, making it clear he's expecting something big. So Yuria starts acting a bit shy, saying she's actually getting a little nervous now, but she really hopes she can impress him. Ars finishes the conversation by telling her he's definitely looking forward to it. The sun starts setting over the trees, leaving the forest in total silence. Ars notices Yuria still looks like she has a ton of energy left, but he figures there's really no point in pushing her too hard right now, so he speaks up and suggests they just find a spot to rest for the day, and Yuria tells him she's totally fine with that. She gives him a little smile and says he shouldn't worry about her so much, especially since she hasn't been slacking on her training at all. Ars points out they've already covered a lot of ground, and besides, monsters usually start getting way more active once it gets dark. Just then, something moves fast through the thick trees nearby. Ars catches a tiny sound and instantly locks onto where it came from. Yuria sees him freeze up and asks if something is wrong, while Ars just looks back into the woods trying to figure out what he heard. He starts reaching for his gear and quietly tells her that something out there definitely just spotted them. Staring into the dark forest, he starts thinking about what they should do next. Ars stands with his back to the path, keeping his eyes locked on the shadows as Yuria moves like a flash, drawing her blade and cutting down a massive wolf in one shot. Ars looks down, a bit worn out from the constant tension of the woods. Yuria stays sharp, her eyes searching the trees for the next threat while she glances back at Ars and asks if he's doing all right. The dead monster lies on the dirt, blood staining the ground where it fell. More growls come from the dark as Yuria warns Ars that these things are hellhounds. These beasts are bad news, fierce monsters that actually radiate heat from their fur, and they're known for being crazy territorial, showing no mercy to anyone who steps into their woods. Ars looks around at the pack surrounding them and realizes they've walked straight into hellhound territory. Yuria looks at the pack and realizes they aren't going to let her go. While Ars starts to say he'll have to step in, but Yuria is already gone, kicking off the dirt with so much force it leaves a crater behind. She flies through the air like it's nothing, bringing her sword down on the first hellhound she sees. Ars can barely keep up with her speed, he just stands there as blood sprays across the grass. Yuria lands softly and whispers that she's already at 2 kills, not even breaking a sweat yet. She adjusts her grip on her sword and tells herself it's time for the next one. 3 more beasts lunge at her from the shadows, snapping their jaws as they try to corner her. Yuria doesn't panic at all. She thinks to herself that this is exactly what she's been waiting for. And honestly, she went through everything just so she could finally see things like this for herself. With one massive horizontal slash, she tears through the whole pack, thinking about how glad she is to be out of that cramped prison. Ars watches the beasts charge and tells himself he isn't about to lose this one either. So he calmly drops down and plants his hand firmly against the dirt, launching a complex spell called Weg Spiral Prelude that uses multi-layered impacts to absolutely wreck the hounds. Ars doesn't even blink. He just stays locked in as the magic finishes off the pack, leaving the monsters dead on the ground, completely taken out in a single move. Yuria stops and stares, wondering what she just saw. She's totally shocked that he's using multiple magic types and doing it all chantless. She thinks about how almost nobody can even use more than one magic at a time, but to see Ars doing it without a single word is just on a whole other level. Ars just stands there looking around, casually asking if that was finally all of them. Yuria watches Ars walk away, thinking about how impressive it was that he cleared the rest of the enemies in a heartbeat, and she starts wondering if he even needed her help at all. Ars looks back over his shoulder and just gives a casual reply, saying he wonders about that too. Yuria stays silent for a second, but she can't help but feel a certain way about the whole situation, as she thinks to herself that looks can definitely be deceiving when it comes to someone like him. Ars mentions he was actually really surprised to see her fight like that, especially since she wasn't even using a gift. Yuria starts to get a bit flustered, telling him that compared to what he can do, she feels like she wouldn't stand a chance against his swordplay, but Ars just tells her she showed him something really cool. That makes her beam with a huge smile as she sheathes her blade, saying she's just glad she could live up to his expectations. But a second later, she has this sudden realization and starts panicking that she got way too caught up in the moment, hoping she didn't actually weird him out, while Ars just stands there looking confused. Ars starts walking through the woods, deciding it's time to find a spot. He finds a clearing and suggests they rest there, even if it's not much to look at, because the fur they have will keep them warm against the cold for a good while. Ars hands over a thick blanket and tells Yuria to use it, since it's going to get way colder once dawn hits. Yuria takes it but looks a little worried, asking if he actually has one for himself too. Ars just sits back against a tree and tells her not to worry about it because he's used to the chill, so she should be the one using it. Yuria looks at him, thinking about how he's always being so thoughtful and considerate toward her. So she grabs the edge of the blanket and moves in closer, wrapping it around both of them while telling him they'll be way warmer if they huddle together, even though Ars keeps insisting he's fine. She gets a bit flustered and says she just doesn't want him catching a cold. Ars sees she won't back down, so he just smiles and says he'll take her up on that offer. As they settle in, Yuria looks over at Ars and asks if he's actually looking for someone specific in the Magic City, reminding him that he mentioned before how there was someone he really wanted to meet. Ars gets a serious look on his face and tells her he's looking for a person known as the Essence of Magic. Yuria nods, saying she's actually heard a few rumors about them herself. She mentions that word is there an incredibly powerful person who sits at the very top of the mage world, and Ars clenches his fist tight, saying his goal is to fight and actually defeat that person at their absolute peak. He tells her that this is the whole reason he was born and why he exists, to make his name known to everyone. Yuria listens and immediately offers to help him out with that, but Ars starts to push back, calling her princess again. She just smiles and cuts him off, telling him he should really just call her Yuria from now on. She explains that since they're traveling together, they're already friends, so there's no point in using formal titles. Yuria sits there looking a bit shy and asks Ars if he wouldn't mind just calling her by her name from now on. Ars is totally cool with it, and says if that's how it is, she should just call him Ars too. While they're sitting by the tree, Yuria asks him what he was actually trying to say earlier. Ars looks away and explains he just thinks she should focus on her own stuff for a bit. But Yuria leans in and tells him he's already helped her so much, so she's going to help him no matter what. She reaches out and grabs his cloak tight, clearly not wanting to let go as Ars notices and asks what's up, wondering if she's just feeling the cold. She gets all flustered and starts apologizing, trying to explain it's not that at all, so Ars tells her not to worry about it, realizing she's probably exhausted from being on the run and needs sleep. Yuria looks completely drained and apologizes one last time as she starts to drift off. Yuria thinks back on being a prisoner and how it made her stop trusting men, realizing she was just being paranoid. She feels terrible for constantly doubting Ars and putting him through all those tests, especially since he only ever showed her kindness, making her feel like what she did was pretty awful. She tells Ars he's a great guy and says she can't thank him enough for saving her, even if she can't pay him back yet. Yuria looks at him and promises that if he ever gets into trouble, she'll always be right there by his side. Ars looks back and tells her that he feels the exact same way, and under the bright full moon he promises to save her as many times as it takes. Yuria asks if he really means it. Ars just smiles and says they're friends now, so she should rely on him for whatever she needs, leading Yuria to blush and look away, saying she's just so happy and truly glad they met. She leans her head against his shoulder and finally lets herself relax. Ars looks at Yuria and realizes she's already passed out from being so tired, and it gets him thinking about how the reason he's actually looking for the essence of magic is a little different than what he told her. He thinks about his real goal, which is to prove that someone weak can beat the strongest people out there, mostly for all the people who are hated or can't live freely, so they can finally move forward without any fear. Since he was always called a failure, he's determined to defeat the essence of magic and become a light for everyone else. But back at House Megenberg, Orpheus is shocked that an elf would travel all the way to the middle of nowhere. The elf visitor says sorry for dropping by so suddenly, but he's got something he needs to discuss. And it turns out this guy is actually one of the 10 great heavenly saints of the Holy Law Church. His name is Volg von Arkenfield, and he just sits there looking calm as Orpheus brings up how the Earth Empire completely destroyed the Verudo Kingdom. Orpheus looks on with a pretty cold expression as it's explained that everything happening was just an attempt to get his hands on the light gift. Volg sits there calmly, explaining how the Holy Church thinks white-type gifts are sacred, while a glass of wine sits on the table between them. He tells Orpheus he's sure he knows how important Princess Yuria is, especially since she's one of the rare people who actually has the light gift, and even though the Earth Empire and the Church are supposed to be allies, he says they can't just look the other way on this. Orpheus tries to play it off, saying he's helping with the search, but as a simple margrave, he doesn't really have the power to do much, so he just looks Volg in the eye and tells him straight up that he won't be able to help him. Volg takes a sip of his wine and says that puts him in a really tough spot, but the church isn't going to just back down. Then he makes a crazy request, asking if Orpheus would be willing to hand the princess over to the church as soon as he finds her. Orpheus grinds his teeth and gets heated, asking if the guy is seriously suggesting he betray his own country, because there's no way he'd ever do that. But Volg doesn't seem bothered at all, just staring at his wine and starting to bring up something he remembers about Orpheus. Volg leans in and asks if the name was Ars, mentioning that his hearing gift is actually a pretty rare power to have. Orpheus's expression sharpens immediately as he hears his son's name brought up in the conversation, and he demands to know exactly who Volg got that information from. Volg just reminds him that as one of the 10 great heavenly saints, he's the one who originally confirmed the heir's gift, so he starts wondering out loud what kind of organization the people involved actually belonged to. Orpheus calls him out, saying he's criticizing the Earth Empire while doing the exact same thing himself, but Volg just tells him to relax and promises he won't let any of this leak out to anyone else. Orpheus isn't buying the act and glares at him, asking what he's really after with all of this. Volg stands there calmly and explains that regarding the person they believe is Ars, the church has solid intel that the kid was the one who helped Princess Yuria escape. Volg mentions that if the rumors are true, they've got no choice but to tell the Emperor, because if they try to play dumb now, it won't save them once all the Megenberg family secrets get leaked. He leans in with a smirk and tells Orpheus that everything they've built could be totally ruined as he stands there casually, letting the weight of the threat sink in for a second. Orpheus sits there with his fists clenched, knowing that helping his son would be seen as treason, and it hits him hard that he's dealing with a holy knight who holds all the cards. He looks down, realizing that even if they wanted to take Volg out, the Empire's magic knights wouldn't stand a chance. But then Volg drops a hand on his shoulder and says there might be another way. He tells Orpheus that if he's willing to play ball and cooperate with the Holy Church, he'll handle the Emperor personally, explaining that this is the only way to keep his house protected before asking him what he's gonna do. Orpheus stands there thinking about how much Volg gets on his nerves, especially since the guy knows he's in a spot where he can't refuse, so he finally gives in and says he'll help the church with the search. Volg just closes his eyes and smiles, telling Orpheus that he really appreciates him being so understanding about the whole situation. But then he shifts gears and mentions hearing something pretty concerning about Ars. He brings up the kid's specific gift, that supposedly weak hearing ability he has, and Orpheus immediately shuts it down, calling it a totally worthless gift and asking what the big deal is. Volg gets a bit more serious and asks if Orpheus knows about the mysterious person causing a scene in different countries, explaining that this person has been easily spying on top-secret info from all over the world. Orpheus looks at the reports and asks straight out if he's suggesting that this master spy is actually Ars, while Volg just leans back and admits that he doesn't have any solid proof just yet. Volg looks down while explaining that every nation is currently terrified, frantically searching for the culprit. And even the Holy Church is getting involved because Ars is interested in this person. But Orphis just calls it a total wild goose chase, thinking they're looking for someone who doesn't exist. Volg admits that might be true, but it's not something they can just ignore. He starts talking about the mysterious figure that every world leader is after, finally revealing that people call this person the essence of magic. The scene shifts back to the forest where Yuria is knocked out fast asleep, until she finally opens her eyes and realizes that someone is standing right over her. She starts apologizing immediately, but Ars just tells her it's fine and she was probably just tired. He tells her they should probably get moving again since they're finally getting close to the end. Ars and Yuria finally make it to the edge of the forest and see the massive white tower standing tall in the distance. Ars looks at it and realizes that's the famous Tower of Babel standing right in front of them. He asks Yuria if it's her first time seeing it, and she admits she's never been able to leave the country before. She looks at the structure with a smile, calling it the symbol of the magic city that pierces the sky and the tower that reaches the gods. Yuria continues explaining that any mage trying to reach the heavenly realm eventually ends up at this tower, and Ars gets pretty hyped, saying he can't wait to get inside. He asks if she's ready to keep going, but then he stops for a second, looking like he's about to say something personal before trailing off. They walk up to the massive city gates, and Ars asks how they're actually supposed to get in. Yuria thinks there should be a guard around to let them through, when suddenly, they hear someone running toward them as fast as they can. A girl with a ponytail suddenly tackles Yuria into a huge hug. It's Karen, and she's yelling about how glad she is that her sister is safe. Yuria is caught off guard by the surprise hug and asks Karen what she's even doing there. Karen explains that after she heard Verudo had fallen, she figured her sister would eventually make her way here. Ars just stands there watching the two sisters catch up, feeling a little out of place during the reunion. Karen finally notices him and gives him a suspicious look, asking her sister who this guy is supposed to be. She gets in his face and asks if he's some soldier from Verudo, but Ars just plays it cool and introduces himself. Yuria places a hand on her sister's shoulder to calm her down, telling her she needs to stop being so disrespectful to their guest. She goes on to explain that Ars is actually the one who saved her life, while the Earth Empire was hunting her down. Karen's attitude flips instantly as she puts her hands together and says she's sorry for being so rude before properly introducing herself as the former second princess of the Verudo Kingdom. Yuria explains that Ars is currently with the Magic Association and even runs his own guild. Ars just stays quiet, thinking over what he just heard while he asks Karen how a princess like her ended up joining the Magic Association in the first place. Karen starts explaining that the Earth Empire and the Verudo Kingdom have been clashing for a long time and asks him if he knew about their history. She mentions her father, the king, and says he was really worried about how weak their country was compared to the others. So he came up with a plan to close the gap by stealing knowledge from the Magic Association. Karen says that when she found out, she figured she could actually be useful to her sisters for once. That was the whole reason she decided to leave and join the association herself. Yuria laughs and adds that their dad was pretty much losing his mind when Karen dropped that news on him. Ars points out that the association usually doesn't let governments mess with their business, so he asks if a princess is even allowed to join. Karen explains that she actually gave up her right to the throne just to join the association, which makes Ars realize she was dead serious about this. She looks down, feeling bad because she didn't get there in time to be useful, but Yuria stops her right there, telling her that's not true at all. Yuria pulls her sister into a warm hug and tells her she's still a huge help even now, leaving Karen completely speechless and holding back tears from the support. After a moment, they decide they've talked enough and it's time to finally start the baptism ritual. Yuria isn't quite sure what that is, so Karen explains it's just a simple tradition for people visiting the Magic City, and as they prepare to start, the mood gets a lot more serious. Yuria looks at Ars and begins the ritual by calling him a nameless mage, telling him to reveal the world's knowledge and gather all the wisdom he can. Karen continues the ritual, telling Ars that if he seeks out that knowledge, the gods themselves will reach out to him, and she opens her arms wide, officially welcoming him to Valhalla, the legendary realm of the gods. The view opens up to a massive, bustling city filled with people and huge medieval buildings, and the three of them start making their way through the busy streets together. Ars is actually pretty impressed, saying it really is a magic city since the scale and energy are way beyond his old hometown. But then he admits he never really got the chance to actually explore his hometown back then anyway. Karen just smiles and says she was totally blown away by the place when she first arrived, too. As they keep walking, Yuria speaks up to ask Karen where exactly they're heading right now. Karen looks back a bit surprised and asks if she forgot to mention the destination, so she gives a quick wink and explains they're finally at the headquarters for her guild. Yuria looks at her sister in total disbelief and repeats the word tavern back to her like she can't believe it. So Karen explains that guild operating costs are no joke, so she actually runs a tavern on the side to make ends meet. Yuria gets all flustered and blushes while asking her younger sister if she even drinks alcohol. But Karen insists she can totally run the place even if she isn't a drinker, while Yuria just looks at her with a lot of doubt. Yuria admits she just imagined her sister in a bunny suit pouring drinks and hanging out with customers all night, which makes Karen rub her head in frustration as she tells her sister she's thinking of a completely different kind of shop. She clarifies that they only serve food and booze, though some idiots do show up with the wrong idea sometimes. The sign outside says the shop is called Sisters of the Lamp, making it pretty obvious they aren't hiding their connection. Karen finally opens the door and tells Ars and Yuria to stop standing around and just get inside already. But the second they step in, they hear the loud sound of glass shattering across the floor. Some creep is bothering one of the waitresses, telling her to just give him a second of her time. She's clearly uncomfortable and begs him to stop. But someone suddenly reaches out and grabs the guy's arm to stop him in his tracks. Before he can even react, a sharp blade flashes right past his face at high speed, and it thuds into the wall right behind him. Elsa stands there holding more knives, calmly telling the guy he needs to stop what he's doing. He's completely losing it and shaking. He recognizes Elsa immediately and starts stuttering, trying to claim the whole thing was just a joke, so Elsa just gives him this cold look. She says she gets it, but then tells him he's officially kicked out for the day, and she pulls out 3 more blades, giving him a dead serious warning that her hand might just slip if he sticks around any longer. The guy doesn't need to be told twice and sprints out the door, nearly knocking over Ars and the others as they finally step inside. The waitress takes a deep breath and thanks Elsa for having her back, though Elsa acts like it was no big deal. She turns to the door and welcomes Karen back. Meanwhile, Karen just stands there looking pretty awkward about the whole scene. Elsa tells Yuria she's just happy to see she's safe, and Yuria smiles back, telling her friend that she hasn't changed a single bit. Elsa shifts her focus and gives Ars a skeptical look, asking out loud who exactly she's looking at right now. Ars introduces himself and explains that he and Yuria ended up traveling there together by chance, ending with a polite hello. But Elsa is internally losing it because this guy just used Yuria's first name like they're close. She plays it cool and just says she's Elsa. Yuria speaks up to back him up, happily telling Elsa that Ars is actually the one who saved her life, so she explains that Elsa used to serve her older sister. Ars realizes they've been close for a long time, asking if that's how it is. Ars thinks back to a previous conversation, wondering if Elsa is the same maid Yuria was talking about earlier. Karen jumps in and mentions she's the boss of the Verut Guild, but admits that Elsa is the one actually keeping the whole place running. She goes on about how Elsa is basically perfect, handling everything from the cooking and laundry to managing the guild and the tavern. Ars just stares at Karen with a judging look, making her get all defensive as she asks him what his problem is. Ars brushes off Karen's suspicion, looking away and telling her it's really nothing at all. Karen isn't buying it and wonders if he's telling the truth, asking what he's even doing there if that's the case. Elsa walks by with some food and mentions that everyone working at the tavern is a schuler, which leaves Ars completely confused by the term. Karen winks and explains that it just means they're all members of the guild. The guy behind the bar introduces himself as Lyra, the guild master, letting them know the guild actually runs the whole shop. Elsa turns her attention back to Ars and addresses him formally as Lord Ars. She gives him a deep bow, thanking him for saving Yuria's life. Ars just waves a hand, telling her not to worry about it. Since she's so grateful, Elsa says she wants to do something for him, offering to whip up a special meal as a thank you. Ars gives a small smile and says he'd really appreciate that. Elsa tells him she'll get started right away and to just wait a bit, but as she starts to head off, Ars thanks her and mentions he has one more favor to ask while she's at it. Ars holds out his dirty, torn-up cloak and asks Elsa if she can just get rid of it for him. Elsa keeps her professional look, closing her eyes while she tells him she's got it, and as she heads off with the trash, she politely asks Lady Yuria to excuse her for a second. Yuria looks pretty worked up, thinking to herself that this is the perfect chance to make up for failing before. She puts her hands together with a big smile and calls out to Elsa, offering to jump in and help too. But Elsa gives her this terrifying look over her shoulder, telling her they've got the cooking covered, so she should stay put and talk to their guest. Yuria whines his name while looking totally shot down, but Ars just thinks to himself that Elsa is one seriously capable maid. And as things settle down, Karen stands by the table and asks what kind of gift Ars actually has. Before he can even speak, Yuria looks all proud and explains that it's just hearing, which leaves Karen wondering why her sister is answering for him. Ars takes a sip of his drink and plays it down, saying it just helps him hear well. Karen tries to be nice, telling him she's sure there'll be a use for it at some point. Yuria mentions she was curious about what gift Ars used to save her sister, but Karen is skeptical, asking if having a hearing gift just means he's got good ears. Karen stares at her drink, thinking to herself that based on how Yuria is acting, there's no way this guy's gift is just some normal ability. And suddenly, Yuria gets this look on her face like she just remembered something important, blurting out that she completely forgot to ask about something. She turns to Karen and asks if she's still focused on moving up the ranks, since it's been a while since they last talked about it. Karen looks back pretty casually and lets her know that she actually just made it to the 4th rank, a level known as Throne. Ars stays quiet, just looking at her while he processes the fact that she's already reached the 4th rank, which is part of the Magic Association's hierarchy, a strict system of power levels that everyone in the city follows, and it turns out there are 12 levels in total, but the real goal is the 1st rank, called Absolute, which basically makes you a demon lord. Karen explains that she wanted a high rank because of the influence it brings, thinking it would make her useful the moment she stepped outside the Magic City. She says there's no reason to rush anymore now that things have changed, while Ars thinks to himself that going after the demon lord might actually be fun. Ars mentions that the current demon lords are supposedly the strongest ever, which only makes him feel like the challenge is actually worth it, and Karen just smirks, saying she's looking forward to that more than anything. A waitress shows up at the table with a tray of food, apologizing for the wait while she sets everything down, saying she's sorry it's just basic tavern food but hopes it tastes alright. Ars looks at the spread and realizes this is actually the first real meal he's ever had, so he tells her he's definitely going to enjoy it and immediately takes a big bite, using his fork to finally taste some real food for once. He just sits there for a second with his eyes closed, slowly chewing, and tells them how delicious it is, while Karen gives a simple thanks for the meal. Karen notices something and tells Yuria she's got a bit of food stuck on her mouth, which catches Yuria totally off guard. Before she can do anything, Ars reaches over and tells her it's right there, leaning in close to grab the crumb and pop it right into his own mouth, leaving Yuria bright red and completely losing her cool. Karen just smirks at him, looking pretty amused as she tells Ars he's actually being really bold. But the vibe changes fast when Elsa shows up behind her, calling out her name with a look that says she's not having it. Karen tries to play it off, asking if Elsa isn't being just a little too strict with her lately, but Elsa doesn't budge and tells her that's not true at all. As they all sit together, Ars starts thinking about how sharing a meal like this is actually a pretty amazing feeling, and then Yuria speaks up, asking Ars if he'd be down to go explore the town tomorrow. Ars admits he hadn't really thought about it but says it's a solid idea. Karen keeps eating, totally agreeing with the plan, while Yuria mentions that their guild is actually planning to head out to the Lost Lands tomorrow, so Karen asks her sisters what they're going to do about that. Yuria decides she definitely wants to go, and then turns to ask Ars what his plan is. Ars doesn't hesitate and says he wants to go to the Lost Lands too, since he's heard so much about that place through his special hearing, and is honestly just curious to see what it's like with his own eyes. The place they're talking about is a land that was once ruled by a guy known as the Demon Emperor, but ever since he was killed in the war against the gods, the whole area lost its order and became a total wasteland. Ars looks at everyone and mentions it's a pretty long trip to the Lost Lands, asking if they're really planning to walk, but Karen cuts that idea short, saying that walking there is definitely not happening. She explains they're actually going to use the teleportation gate over at the Tower of Babel instead, though Yuria looks a little unsure, like she's got something else on her mind. Yuria points out that it's not just other guilds heading to the Lost Lands, even entire nations are sending their armies. She thinks things are getting so serious that it wouldn't even be weird if the Earth Empire itself showed up. Elsa steps in to calm her down, telling Lady Yuria she'll be fine since she's got Elsa right there by her side, and Ars just smiles and agrees, saying that's definitely the truth. Karen decides to wrap things up for the night, suggesting that they finally call it a day, and tells Ars she'll personally show him where the guest room is. Karen teases her sister, asking if she's really fine with having a separate room from Ars, but Yuria snaps back, saying of course she is. Yuria starts blushing, stammering that it's not like she actually hates the guy, while Ars just stands there feeling pretty awkward. They make it to the room, and Karen tells Ars he should just make himself at home, adding that he can just ask Elsa if he needs anything, while Ars thanks her and says the place is perfect. But Karen stops for a second looking at Ars as he starts to turn away. She tells Yuria that both she and Ars are way too dirty and actually smell a bit, so they really need to hit the bath. The comment catches Yuria completely off guard, and her face turns bright red on the spot. She starts frantically hitting Karen, yelling that she didn't need to say that in front of Ars, while Karen just watches her, surprised to see her sister acting so different. Ars agrees that he needs a wash, thinking he's way too messy to be sitting in such a nice room. Karen keeps teasing her sister by pinching her cheeks, joking about how scary Yuria is, so Yuria just gives in and says she'll take him to get cleaned up first. Before heading out, Yuria looks back at Ars with a bit of a blush, telling him she'll be back to get him later on. The door clicks shut behind them, leaving Ars alone in the quiet guest room for a bit. Ars sits back on the bed, thinking about how crazy things have been, but he's actually having a great time despite the chaos. He knows he still needs to find out more about the essence of magic though, so he decides there's really no reason to rush anything and figures he should just enjoy the adventure while it lasts. Meanwhile, Yuria is standing by the entrance to the bathhouse, looking a little nervous as she gets ready to wash up. She steps into the large steaming bath and notices that Elsa is already in there. And Elsa explains that Karen actually invited her over, saying she's there specifically to help Yuria out with whatever she needs. Yuria mentions how unusual the whole thing feels, but Elsa just tells her it's really not that big of a deal. Karen stands up to leave the water, and Elsa looks a bit surprised, asking if she's really getting out this early, but Karen just smiles and says she has a few things she needs to get ready for tomorrow. She lets her sister know that Elsa is there to help out, so Yuria should take her time reminding her to make sure she washes off all that dirt. Yuria relaxes into the water with a smile, telling her sister that she'll do exactly that later on. A soft knock comes from the door of the guest room as Yuria calls out to see if Ars is still awake. The door starts to creak open while Ars sits at the desk, looking back and letting her know he's up. He asks what's going on and Yuria just looks at him, wondering if he already forgot that she promised to come back for him. Ars jumps up so fast he knocks his chair over, finally realizing it's time for the bath, and he's definitely been waiting for this. Yuria thinks he's being way too dramatic, teasing him for acting like it's the first time he's ever seen a tub, but Ars just closes his eyes and says she's right, because back in the cell he only had wet towels to clean himself with. Yuria looks down for a second, just saying she sees after hearing about how he used to live, but she perks up and tells Ars she hopes this bath ends up being a really good memory for him. The two of them start heading down the hallway together, their footsteps echoing as they walk side by side. Ars catches a scent or notices something about her hair and makes a confused sound, which makes Yuria turn back to look at him, asking what's on his mind. Instead of answering, Ars leans in close and starts sniffing her hair while she just stands there blushing and confused. She jumps back a bit, asking what he's doing all of a sudden, but Ars just casually says she smelled nice since she just finished her bath, making Yuria complain that he has no sense of personal space. She shows him some cleanser and explains it'll wash all the dirt off, so Ars says he'll give it a shot. They finally reach the spot and Yuria comes to a halt right outside the door. Yuria leads the way down the hall and points out that the bathroom is right ahead, but Ars notices another door and asks if that one is any different. Yuria explains that it's also a bathroom, but she hasn't actually gotten it ready for today, so she tells him it would be a huge help if he just used the one that's already set. Ars just nods along and says he gets it, and then he thanks her for everything before casually suggesting he should wash her back next time. Yuria just stands there with a blank look on her face, barely able to process what he said. Ars keeps going, mentioning how he heard that people who are close to each other have this whole culture where they wash each other's backs in the bath. He grabs her hands and says since they're friends now, they should just go in together next time, leaving Yuria totally frozen. Yuria just sighs and goes along with it, while Ars tells her he'll be counting on her if the chance ever actually comes up. She suddenly shouts that she's leaving and bolts out of there, leaving Ars to just casually wish her a good night, which leaves Ars alone, thinking about how Karen really went out of her way to look after a total stranger like him. He decides he definitely needs to thank her later, then he heads over and slides the door to the bath open. As he walks in, he notices someone is already in the water and wonders who could be there at this hour, so he quickly apologizes, mentioning he didn't think anyone would be using the place and sorry for the trouble. Yuria turns around completely shocked to see him and stammers his name, wondering why on earth he's standing right there. Ars realizes it's just her, but Yuria is still totally panicking and asks him again why he even showed up. He explains that he just wanted to find her so he could ask about all the stuff he still doesn't understand yet, and mentions that Karen was actually the one who pointed him this way, thinking she was just being nice and helpful. Yuria looks away, blushing like crazy while thinking about how she's definitely going to have a word with Karen later, and she just stammers out that she understands the situation, even though she's still clearly beyond embarrassed. Just then, a voice comes from the steam as Elsa speaks up, waiting for Ars to explain himself, so she asks him if he really has nothing else to say to the two of them standing right there. Ars finally notices she's there too and just casually mentions he didn't realize Elsa was also in the bath, but she just stares him down with this super serious look, asking if he's got something to say or if he wants her opinion. He just looks at her and casually remarks that she looks like she's in great shape and clearly well-trained. Then he pauses for a second, putting his hand to his chin like he's deep in thought about it all. Ars looks at both of them and tells them straight up that he thinks they're beautiful and should be way more confident. Elsa's eyes go sharp as she glares at him, snapping that this is absolutely not the place for a conversation like that. Ars looks over at Elsa with a totally blank face and calls her name, but Yuria is starting to get a bad feeling. She realizes they might not be on the same page at all, and Ars holds out a bucket filled with soap and bottles, asking if Elsa could maybe show him how to use this stuff. He figures she knows her way around a bath, so he just comes out and says he has no clue how he's supposed to wash himself with these cleaning agents. Elsa just stands there in a daze, repeating the words back to him while her eyes go wide and she starts blushing like crazy. She can't even get a full sentence out because she's so caught off guard by the request, but then she finds her voice and snaps at him, asking if he seriously expects her to wash his body for him right there. Yuria is shaking in the background and calls out to Ars, who just lets out a confused sound like he doesn't see what the big deal is. Elsa doesn't say anything else. She just gives him this sharp, icy glare that shows she's definitely not in the mood for jokes, and then she sinks into the water up to her face to hide her embarrassment. Yuria loses it and yells that this isn't that kind of place, making it clear that she still feels like everyone is completely misunderstanding each other. She tries to check on Elsa, but the tension in the room is just way too high. So Yuria tries to explain that Ars's knowledge of the world is a bit messed up since he's been isolated for so long. Yuria listens as Ars confirms the situation, simply saying she's heard all about what happened and mentions she knows about him being locked away for so long. She looks over and asks if he ever even got to talk to any women during that whole time, but Ars actually has to stop and think about it for a second. He realizes that outside of his late mother, he really hasn't met anyone else at all. Yuria rubs her head like she's getting a headache, admitting it's pretty wild to hear, but at least it explains why he's so clueless. She looks at him and says there is honestly a lot she needs to teach him about how the world works, though she starts blushing and looking away, mentioning that if they stay in the water much longer she's going to catch a cold. She decides it's better to just drop the subject for now and suggests they find a better time to talk about this later. Elsa tells Yuria it's time to head out, so Yuria tells Ars goodnight and starts walking away, but then Ars just casually waves them off. He says goodnight, then adds that next time they should all just get in the bath together. Elsa stops dead in her tracks and looks back at him with a total "what did you just say" face. Elsa looks right at Ars with a super serious face, making him let out a surprised sound as she asks him directly if he's actually planning to take responsibility for his words. Ars stands there in the water and says of course he will, though he's a little confused why she's even asking, which makes Elsa's face turn bright red as she starts to completely lose her cool. Ars just looks at her with a blank stare, asking if there's actually something wrong since Elsa tries to play it off and tells herself she basically got his consent, then tells Yuria it is time to leave. Yuria is still bright red and totally embarrassed, whispering to Elsa about how Ars saw way too much, but Elsa just apologizes for being right there when it happened, insisting he's definitely going to have to make up for it. Ars stays behind thinking for a bit, realizing he had no idea that other guy could even make a face like that, while Yuria watches Elsa walk away, thinking she used to be the cold type but realizes Ars actually has a pretty funny side. The sun comes up and some birds start chirping outside the window. It's a fresh start to the day as Ars looks back and asks if they're ready to head out. Walking down the stairs, he runs into Karen, who gives him a quick morning greeting. Ars smiles and says morning back, and Karen notices he actually looks like he got some good sleep for once. She stops for a second like she's about to say something else, which leads to her teasing him, asking if that bath left him with some good memories. Ars just casually says of course it did. Yuria chimes in from the side, telling Karen she shouldn't be shy and should just join them next time, which totally backfires and leaves Karen completely embarrassed. She can barely even look at her sister while she stammers out a response, but Yuria just keeps it going saying she's honestly just happy to see her and Ars getting so close. Yuria has this scary look on her face while she brings up Karen tricking Ars into the bath, and Karen starts sweating, realizing her sister is actually pretty pissed off. Karen tries to defend herself by saying she already apologized for the prank, but Ars just wants her to let it go so they can move on. Right then, Elsa's voice cuts through the tension asking what the two of them are even talking about. She stands there with her arms crossed, telling them the rest of the group already left and they're behind schedule so they better start moving. Karen looks totally relieved to see her friend showing up at the perfect moment. She jumps on the chance to change the subject, telling Yuria they should save the chatter for later and just hurry up before they get left behind. Karen low-key pumps her fist, thinking Elsa's timing was absolutely clutch. Elsa doesn't say anything back, but she gives Karen a side-eye like she knows exactly what's going on. A little later, the group finally arrives at their destination. Ars stands in front of a massive stone building and realizes it's the Tower of Babel. He looks up at the giant structure, taking a second to appreciate the fact that they finally made it. Karen agrees with Elsa and then looks over at Ars, wondering if he has even heard the rumors about this place, which leads into her explaining how she heard that not long ago, someone actually stole all the magical knowledge from the demon lords who rule the tower's top floors. The group keeps walking as Karen adds that it wasn't just the demon king who got robbed, but that many other countries suffered too. Karen even heard the Magic Association almost started a war with the Holy Church because of it. Ars thinks to himself that if this thief actually managed to trick the demon king, they must be on a completely different level. Yuria looks pretty surprised as the dots start connecting in her head, and she starts to ask what that actually means. While everyone starts thinking about that legendary mage who went around stealing magical secrets from every corner of the world. The mysterious figure is apparently known now as the Essence of Magic, a name that carries a ton of weight, so Ars just repeats the title under his breath, looking pretty thoughtful about the whole situation. It takes him back to the time he was chained up in that cell, remembering how he used to pick up all kinds of sounds using his hearing gift. Ars remembers being stuck in chains while the name Essence of Magic was busy making waves everywhere, which leads Yuria to mention how much damage the thief has caused, though Karen just thinks the whole thing is a total headache. As they keep moving, Ars asks if this Essence of Magic person is actually hanging out in the Magic City right now. Karen tells him there are plenty of rumors, but the truth is nobody has actually seen the thief in person yet. Ars turns to Yuria and asks if she's the one specifically looking for this mysterious figure, while he realizes out loud that tracking someone like that down isn't going to be an easy job for anyone. Karen cuts the conversation short by announcing that the group has finally arrived at their spot. They stand before a massive door as Ars realizes it's a teleportation gate, asking if it really works by draining the user's mana. Karen gives him a smug look and says he should just think of that mana drain as a standard toll for the trip. She reaches out toward him, saying they might as well get started right away without wasting any more time. Karen gives Ars a sudden shove from behind, telling him to go first while he shouts out in surprise, totally caught off guard by the push. She just laughs it off, joking that making weird faces once in a while is actually good exercise for the facial muscles, though Yuria isn't laughing at all. Yuria looks at her sister with a tired expression and tells Karen she needs to make sure she apologizes to Ars for that later. With a quick breath, the group gets ready to move, preparing for the next step of the journey as the gate activates. Karen watches as the other two disappear through the portal, noting that they've successfully sent them off, but then Elsa chimes in with a serious look, telling Karen that it is time for the two of them to get moving as well. She sighs, mentioning how Karen never seems to learn her lesson, no matter how many times she gets caught, making Karen start to sweat as Elsa points out that she doesn't seem to show any regret for her behavior at all. Elsa looks her over and says since Karen clearly doesn't need to train her facial muscles anymore, she'll provide some personal assistance, and as Elsa reaches out, Karen nervously asks what she means by that, sensing things are about to get rough. Elsa gets right in Karen's face, saying she heard that Ars showing up at the women's bath was actually Karen's fault, and Karen just freezes up, looking completely busted as the sweat starts pouring down her face. Karen tries to laugh it off, saying she feels bad about it, but Elsa is shocked that's all she's worried about. Elsa gets a real serious look and says that luckily, Ars told her he would take full responsibility, which leads into her explaining how she always planned on only showing her skin to one man in her life. Karen is totally floored, thinking she's never seen Elsa get this emotional over anything before, and she can't help but wonder what the hell actually happened back there in the bath. Karen tries to cut in, gently suggesting that when Ars talked about taking responsibility, he probably didn't mean it like that. But Elsa isn't hearing it, blushing as she insists that Ars didn't hesitate to step up for even a second, and she finishes by saying he looked her straight in the eye when he gave her his answer. Elsa isn't letting Ars off the hook, saying once a man gives his word he has to keep it, and she definitely isn't letting him pretend the whole thing never happened. She gets even more intense, claiming that if she ever lets another person see her skin, she'll end her own life just to apologize to him, which totally freaks Karen out. She tries to get Elsa to chill, wondering if she was actually way more innocent than anyone realized. Karen tries to brush it off as a small accident, saying Ars only caught a tiny glimpse of her, but Elsa stops her right there, looking like she's about to drop a massive truth bomb. She clenches her fist, shaking with emotion as she tells Karen that it wasn't just a little bit. She stands there dead serious and lets Karen know he saw absolutely everything. Karen just completely loses it, terrified of how bad things have gone. Moving back to the others, Ars asks Yuria if she's okay. She blushes while thanking him for all the help. Yuria looks pretty down, apologizing to Ars because she feels like she's been a total drag on him. Ars and Yuria just stand there completely frozen. They're staring down at the ground with these shocked looks on their faces as someone asks why Karen is even there. Turns out she's sprawled out on the floor, groaning about how much it hurts after taking a nasty fall. She rubs her head and thinks this is basically karma catching up to her. And she's worried she might have actually caused Ars some real trouble. But before she can process it, a pair of boots stops right in front of her. She's still sitting on the ground when Elsa looks down at the group. She seems totally calm, mentioning how she's glad to see that everyone made it back safely. She keeps that same cool face while saying she's relieved that Karen isn't hurt, though her stare is definitely sending Karen into a total panic. The poor girl is sweating bullets and looks like she's about to have a heart attack, so she immediately bolts over to Yuria and clings to her, crying for her big sister. Yuria just looks on, pretty much figuring out that Elsa must have done something to freak her out. Moving on, Elsa suggests they grab whatever supplies they need before they hit the road, and she asks if anyone has any specific requests for gear. Ars speaks up, saying he'd like to get some new clothes and a dagger, which makes Yuria wonder why he's specifically asking for a weapon. Yuria points out that since Ars is already so good at using magic, she's watching a memory of him absolutely wrecking a monster with a single blast. She asks if a guy with that much power even needs a weapon, but Ars is quick to explain that his mana isn't infinite. He wants to have more options when things get messy, and Yuria just nods along. Karen takes a second to think about where they can find a spot that sells both gear and outfits, and then Ars asks if they should just check out a place called the Badger's Burrow. It sounds like a plan, so Karen corrects him and says it's actually the Badger's Den. She gives a thumbs up, saying it's a guild branch she knows well. She explains that the shop has everything from stuffed animals to heavy combat gear, basically a one-stop shop for whatever they might need, including some pretty high-end adventurer outfits. Karen's sure he'll find something good, and Elsa actually agrees for once. She admits that Karen is actually making a pretty solid suggestion, which is making Karen pout a little bit because of the backhanded compliment. Elsa doesn't seem to care and just asks if they're ready to head out. The group finally makes it inside the shop. It's huge, filled with fancy counters and gear everywhere. Julia is totally floored by how nice the place is and tells Ars it's absolutely beautiful. He's a bit more worried though, mentioning they should probably get moving before they're caught. But then Ars catches Julia looking at a display case and stops to see what caught her eye. He looks at her for a second and tells her he thinks a certain piece would actually look really good on her. Julia's face lights up instantly. She turns to him, all excited, and asks which one he's talking about. Ars says he bets it'll look great against her silver hair as he reaches out, and he gently slides a flower-shaped hair clip into her hair to test it out. Julia is left blushing and totally speechless. Ars just looks at her and tells her it really does suit her. She starts smiling and laughs it off a little, telling him he's surprisingly good at flattery. Julia asks if he really thinks that, and Ars just gives her a straight look. He tells her he's only saying what he actually thinks, making it clear he's being for real. Julia is still blushing hard from the compliment and mumbles that she understands, so she might actually just buy the clip, but she quickly tries to play it cool, saying she's only considering it because she's already there. Ars just wonders what's up while Karen is standing nearby, completely distracted. She's got this huge blush and her eyes are sparkling as she looks at a super cute teddy bear sitting on the shelf. She looks totally mesmerized by it, so Ars notices and asks her straight up if she wants it. Karen looks a bit surprised that he caught her staring, and she immediately puts the plushie back on the counter, trying to act like it's no big deal, telling him she doesn't want it and was really just looking. She keeps her hands close, clearly still thinking about it, and mentions that something that cute would just be a total waste to keep in her bleak, boring room. But then Ars picks the bear right back up and tells her she's wrong about that, because putting something like this in a room that lacks personality is perfect. It would finally add some much-needed color to her space. Karen looks down and admits that Ars actually makes a pretty good point. Ars tells her that if she ever gets tired of it, she could just give it away, saying he's sure some kid would end up loving it. That one comment hits Karen like a ton of bricks. She looks completely shocked as her brain starts racing. She looks at the bears and thinks that for the sake of the child, she really should just go ahead and buy it. Karen starts blushing like crazy, imagining a future where she and Ars are parents holding their own baby. She can't believe he's already thinking that far ahead, and just like that, all the stress and anxiety she was feeling seems to just disappear. She holds the bear close and tells him that if it's something they chose together, she doesn't have any second thoughts, smiling as she says it might be a bit early, but they should definitely buy it for the child's sake. Ars is totally confused about what she means by it being early, but he just goes with it and says he'll pay for it. Karen says she's sorry for making him buy it. She wants to help pay, but she's just a bit short on cash right now. Karen smiles and says she doesn't mind at all, especially since Ars is going to be a high earner from here on out. Ars says that's definitely the plan and tells her she should never hesitate to rely on him. So Karen replies that life is all about supporting each other anyway. Holding onto the stuffed animal, Karen tells Elsa she had no idea she liked kids so much, mentioning how lucky Schuler's kids are that Elsa cares about them this much. Elsa peeks out from behind a wall, looking totally overwhelmed and breaking a sweat. Karen starts blushing like crazy while hugging the bear, quietly whispering to herself about having 2 girls and 3 boys. She stares at the toys and thinks that depending on Ars, they might end up having even more than that, completely lost in her own world. She hugs the bear even tighter and says she needs to start preparing herself. Elsa watches the whole thing from the shadows, just standing there completely shocked by her sister's behavior. She looks pretty fed up, thinking to herself that once Karen gets like this, there is just no stopping her, but then Ars suddenly appears right behind her, asking what exactly she thinks she's doing. Elsa tries to play it cool and points toward the back of the shop, telling Ars that the daggers are over there. Ars gives her a look and says she's acting super weird, asking if something is up, but Elsa just shakes it off and says it's nothing. She starts physically shoving him toward the counter, telling him to stop worrying about her and just pick a weapon already. Ars walks up to the display case and checks the place out, thinking to himself that even a total amateur could tell these blades are top tier. The bronze daggers catch his eye, but looking at his coins, he realizes he can only afford 2 of them. Yuria shows up next to him and asks if he's finally decided on what he wants to take, so Ars tells her he's going with the 2 bronze daggers, but admits he doesn't actually know how to tell if a weapon is good or not. Yuria picks up a pair to help him out, asking how he feels about these specific ones since she knows her stuff, and explains that for bronze, these have great durability and handle mana really well. Plus, she points out that being able to channel mana means he can boost the sharpness whenever he needs to. Yuria gives a small smile as she checks out the weapons, telling Ars she thinks these will actually be a perfect fit for him. Ars reaches out to take the blade, mentioning that she really seems to know her way around a weapon. Yuria admits she's been handling blades since she was a little kid, then shifts her focus, moving on to evaluate the second dagger on the table. She spots something interesting on the counter, noticing a sturdy-looking black blade sitting right there. Yuria picks it up and notes that while the mana flow isn't quite as smooth as the first one, it's definitely the most durable piece in the shop. She explains that using mana to reinforce it makes it even stronger and way easier to handle in a fight. Ars nods along and says he gets it, deciding right then and there to take both of the daggers she recommended. As they wrap things up, Yuria nervously brings up the fact that he still needs to buy some actual clothes, but Ars looks at his empty pockets and realizes the daggers took all his cash. He tells her he's just going to have to skip the new outfit, which immediately sets Karen off. She snaps at him, telling him there's no way he's just giving up on getting decent clothes. Elsa tells Karen she needs to speak up and say it properly, so Karen just repeats her own name while looking a bit annoyed. Elsa brings up Lady Julia and points out that she isn't nearly as insensitive as Karen is, which leaves both of them standing there looking totally drained from the argument. Ars asks what she's getting at, and after a short pause, Yuria tells him she really wants to thank him for saving her life earlier. She blushes and asks Ars if it's alright, wondering if he'll let her be the one to buy the clothes for him. Yuria asks if he's really sure about this, but Karen just yells for everyone to get a move on while Elsa agrees it's totally fine. Ars looks pretty awkward and mentions it might sound a bit weird for him to say this, but he admits he's never actually picked out his own clothes before. Yuria lights up and says she'll help him, suggesting they pick everything out together right now. Ars seems a bit taken aback by her energy, but agrees, telling her he'll leave all the choices in her hands. Elsa points out that a lot of people pick clothes that match the color of their gift, so she asks Ars if his power is the black-colored type. It's pretty common for gifts to change how someone's hair or eyes look, and Ars realizes he definitely fits that description, but he rubs his head and admits that he doesn't actually think his gift is the black type. Since his gift isn't tied to a color, Yuria asks if he has a personal preference for what he wears, though Ars tells her he doesn't really care. Ars takes a quiet look at the different styles around the shop until he spots a sharp-looking dark coat on a mannequin that really stands out. Yuria gets all excited and says it's an awesome idea, thinking the outfit would look perfect on Ars. Karen agrees with her, while Elsa explains that when a person is good at mana control, even simple clothes like these can become tougher than mithril. Elsa stands behind him and says she thinks it's a solid choice as well, which leaves Ars feeling pretty confident about it. So he tells them that since all 3 of them approve, they'll go with that one. Yuria leans in close with a blush and asks Ars why he doesn't just change right there, making him feel a bit caught off guard, but she's just super excited and insists the new outfit will look great on him. Karen speaks up to get Ars's attention, and when he turns her way, she hands him a sleek leather pouch as a personal gift, telling him it's perfect for holding his dagger. Ars looks at the new gear and thanks her, saying it's actually going to be really helpful for him. He heads off to get ready and then steps out in his brand new boots, standing there fully decked out in the sharp black coat and gear he chose. Yuria's eyes light up immediately and she tells him he looks totally amazing in it. Karen watches him with a small smile, admitting that the look actually suits him pretty well. Elsa just stands there holding a stuffed bear, watching the whole thing without saying a word. Yuria notices Elsa acting a bit off and asks if something is the matter, since Elsa is just standing there blankly. She says the outfit suits ours perfectly, but secretly thinks about how he looks like a parent ready for a fancy school interview. Karen sees Elsa's weirdly happy face and knows she's definitely thinking something strange. The group finally finishes up their shopping trip. Someone says they should head out and find the rest of the group, since everyone is probably gathered up by now moving into the woods. Ars spots some familiar faces and realizes there are people from Virat there too. Yuria asks if he just noticed, while one of the men explains that most of them are former mages who followed him despite the danger. He wanted to influence the association to help the kingdom, but Yuria just feels bad about failing her duty. Yuria looks at her sister and tells Karen that she's already done more than enough, while placing a hand on her shoulder and suggesting they start working hard together from now on. Karen closes her eyes and agrees, finally letting go of the stress she's been holding. She starts daydreaming about a future where a whole nation follows only her sister, but she quickly changes her mind, declaring she'll build a kingdom for both of them instead. Ars just stands there looking tired, asking her if she realizes how weird that sounds. Yuria claps her hands to get the attention of the whole group, and then Elsa chimes in with a serious warning about the Lost Lands being a lawless place. She tells everyone to be extremely careful out there, since things are about to get dangerous. Karen agrees and tells them that getting hurt is a no-go, and dying is definitely out of the question. Karen looks back at the group and asks everyone if they're ready to get moving. As they start walking, Yuria calls out to Ars, and he turns to ask her what's on her mind. She admits that even though it feels a bit wrong, she's actually starting to look forward to the journey. Ars gives her a small smile and says it's a coincidence, because he feels the exact same way. But then Karen stops for a second as she realizes she forgot to mention something pretty important, so she tells the two of them there's something they need to know, and just then a giant eye starts watching them. Karen explains that out here in the Lost Lands, the monsters you run into right at the start are actually top tier, and a massive, muscular cyclops steps out of the trees, looking like a total powerhouse. Karen just looks the beast up and down and casually notes that they're dealing with a cyclops. She smiles and warns them that while the monster is pretty dumb, his physical strength is absolutely insane. Karen keeps up the explanation, saying if anyone gets too close without thinking, they won't be coming back in one piece. She looks over and suggests that if they want the upper hand, sticking to long-range attacks is definitely the best move, but an arrow hits the cyclops in the eye, cutting her off mid-sentence. Yuria is standing there with her bow, telling Karen to save the chatter for later and just get to work already, so Karen just lets out a tired sigh since she was clearly trying to be helpful, but she doesn't waste any time. She plants her foot into the ground to get some traction and moves. The Cyclops tries to grab her with its massive hand, but Karen just says she knows what she's doing as she dodges. She jumps in close, letting out a quick shout as she brings her weapon down with all her strength. There's a huge impact as she connects a hit against the monster. The giant Cyclops hits the dirt hard, completely taken down by her. A guy in the back cheers for Layla after seeing her power, while Yuria notes they probably won't even have to lift a finger, making Karen snap back that there's no way that's actually true. Ars just smiles to himself, thinking about how the timing for everything right now is actually pretty perfect for what he has in mind. Two more huge Cyclops monsters stomp out of the forest carrying clubs. The group thinks they should just let Ars and his big sister handle the new threats on their own. Yuria is totally down for it, while Karen is just worried they should run before they get caught. But Ars suggests making it a game to see who can kill their monster first. Yuria gets a competitive look in her eye and says the loser has to buy the winner whatever they want, asking him if he's up for those stakes. Ars just stares back at her, looking completely calm as he considers the challenge for a second. He gets a little smirk on his face and tells her he's down to go with those rules. Yuria starts focusing her energy, chanting some weird lines about a decaying cathedral and a comet. She grips her sword hilt tight as she finishes the chant, saying she won't fade as she gets ready to move in. Yuria stands right in the middle of a glowing magic circle, focusing everything on the target ahead. She looks dead serious, calling out for her blade eclair to dance at the speed of light. Everything goes completely quiet for a second as a single leaf drifts down to the forest floor. The Cyclops just stands there frozen, not even reacting to the move she just pulled. Yuria starts to walk off like it's no big deal, telling Ars she's heading out now. She mentions feeling a little bad for him, but she has no intention of losing this little game. As she walks away and puts her sword back, the massive monster behind her doesn't even move. Ars catches a glimpse of the aftermath and can't help but look a bit shocked by her speed. She gets a smug little grin on her face, telling him straight up that the win goes to her. Ars just looks down with a bit of a dry smile, admitting that she definitely got him this time. Ars looks at the giant monster's headless body and admits that this is definitely Yuria's win. Yuria gets a smug look and reminds him of their deal, making him promise to buy her whatever she wants next time they go shopping. Ars doesn't even say anything, he just stands there looking completely drained. Karen watches them and realizes that a massive shopping spree is exactly what the princess was after. She starts stressing out, wondering if her pay from this whole expedition is even enough to cover the bill. Ars tells himself it can't be helped, even though it's going to cost him a fortune. He decides he'll just have to run a bunch of experiments later to make sure he gets his money's worth. Trying to look cool, Ars focuses and calls out the name of the lightspeed move. He reaches his hand out to trigger the power, but absolutely nothing happens and the forest stays dead quiet. Karen just stares at him with a totally dead expression, looking completely unimpressed by his little performance. Karen stands there completely baffled by Ars's failed attempt at the move. She totally loses it, yelling that there's no way it would work and asking him what he's even doing. Karen admits Yuria's light speed was cool, but she places a hand on Ars's shoulder and bluntly tells him that some skills just can't be copied no matter how hard he tries. She even looks over at Yuria to get some backup, asking if she agrees with her. Karen points out that his gift is only for hearing, so using light magic is basically impossible for him. Ars just takes the lecture, thinking that her reaction is actually pretty normal for someone in this world. He looks at his hand and notes there was no reaction, proving his hearing gift isn't a white type. Ars points back toward the forest, explaining he only wanted to give it a shot just in case it worked. Then he turns his attention toward Yuria and asks if she has a moment to talk. Ars places his hand right on Yuria's head and activates a skill called Felshung Polyphony. He stands there looking completely focused and calm while the power starts to kick in. Yuria starts blushing from the touch and asks him what exactly he's trying to do, but Ars just moves forward with it, triggering the Eclair Lightspeed ability as a dark path opens up. His eyes sharpen as the world around him begins to shift. He sees a bird frozen perfectly in midair and can't help but say how incredible the whole thing is. Looking at the bird, he realizes this is the crazy level of power that comes with a one-of-a-kind gift. Yuria is totally shocked and says it feels like time itself has stopped, while Karen just holds her head. Ars starts walking through the silent forest, his boots clicking against the ground. He grips his sword and wonders if Julia was always fighting in a world that looked just like this. Ars catches the enemy with a clean horizontal slash, blood spraying everywhere as he stays focused. He admits the spell is impressive, but the toll it takes on his body is a massive problem. Moving on, he realizes the mana consumption is just as bad. It takes way too much energy to keep this up. Besides the physical drain, he looks back at the bleeding giant. He knows he's running out of time before the ability wears off completely. Karen and Yuria can only stand there and watch as the massive weight of the monster hits the ground. Ars keeps walking and thinks about how this level of magic is way beyond what a normal gift can do. Thinking about it more, he realizes Julia must have been even more powerful than he thought. And then a massive magic circle starts glowing with light right at his feet. Ars calls out the Fafnir dragon's roar, and a huge dragon head appears right in front of him. Standing over the defeated beast, Ars looks down and wonders if that's really all it took. But someone yells out to him, making him look back with a confused look on his face. Karen comes up and slaps him on the back to be friendly, but she hits him so hard he nearly doubles over. Yuria sees him struggling and shouts at Karen, asking her what she could have possibly been thinking. Ars is just standing there shaking, trying to understand how a simple pat on the back felt like a finishing move. So Karen puts her hands together, looking pretty guilty as she tries to apologize for the mistake. She explains that when her flame effect is active, the massive power boost also applies to her physical strength, and while she usually tries to keep it under control, she just gets way too excited in the moment. Ars tells her not to worry about it, trying his best to act like he's totally fine, but in his head, he realizes that crazy physical buff is exactly how she pulls off those insane spear moves. Ars looks over at Karen, still trying to wrap his head around how she just pulled off that move, but Yuria steps in, telling Karen she really shouldn't be prying too much into his business. Karen says she just can't help being curious, then asks Ars straight up if he used her sister's magic. So Ars turns back to them and says he did promise to show them the truth someday, and he isn't trying to keep secrets anymore. He explains that his hearing gift has a specific ability called double voice, which lets him copy a target's magic just by listening. Yuria finally understands what that spell was from before, though Karen thinks a power like that sounds way too convenient, but Ars just winks, mentioning he actually has to hear the full incantation and meet a few other rules for it to work. Karen stares at him for a second, looking like she can't believe the guy she's dealing with. It finally clicks for her that the only reason he even wanted to fight her was just to steal her magic moves, and Ars just shrugs it off, admitting that's basically what happened while telling her he's sorry for the trick. Yuria tells Ars she doesn't mind his secret at all, blushing while saying he's actually given her something to look forward to during their shopping trip. She says she sees how it is now, looking way too excited, while Ars just nods along, feeling a bit awkward about how well she's taking it. Ars lets out a sigh and asks her to go easy on him from now on, looking pretty drained after the whole explanation. The piece doesn't last long though. A manticore suddenly jumps out of the brush, and someone yells a warning to watch out as the beast lunges. Yuria looks back at the monster with a completely calm face. The creature swings its massive claws down with a lot of power, but in one smooth motion, Yuria draws her sword and cuts through the air, her eyes locked onto her target. She ducks under the monster's reach as it slams the ground, moving with so much speed that the manticore can't even touch her. She watches the beast go down, her expression never changing once. Karen just puts a hand to her head and sighs, calling out to her sister like she's just showing off again. Karen looks at the mess and complains that she specifically told Yuria to take the head for materials, but she loses it when she sees the monster is split right down the middle, making the whole thing a waste. Yuria just blushes and says it was a reflex, while Karen explains that her sister's body just moves for maximum efficiency during a fight. Ars looks over the area and asks if that's finally all of them. Karen gets a bit thoughtful, wondering why they haven't run into a single male manticore yet. Ars notices something on the ground and pauses for a second, looking confused. He checks the pile of monster corpses and realizes that every single one of them is a female. Karen explains the situation, saying that the males usually only show up when they need to protect the pack, and they're known for hiding their presence whenever there are humans nearby. Ars thinks about it for a moment and points out that if that's how they behave, this hunt could end up being pretty profitable. Karen nods along and mentions that the monster parts thereafter actually sell for a ton of money, so Ars asks if they should just head out and find them right now, but Karen warns him that the males are pretty cowardly, and even though they hide a lot, they're way bigger and more dangerous than any of the females they've seen. Looking up, they see the sun is already starting to go down, and they know fighting in the dark is a terrible idea, mostly because running into a bunch of other random monsters in the middle of the night would be a huge pain. Karen waves them over and suggests they just set up camp and get some rest for the night, so Ars stands back and checks out the camp, noticing the whole place is surrounded by magic earthen walls. It's a pretty useful spell since it lets them feel exactly when something tries to mess with the perimeter. Yuria walks up to find him and says dinner is finally ready, leading Ars over to the table where he starts wondering what kind of food they actually serve on these long trips. Yuria explains that since they're out here, Elsa is putting the meal together using local ingredients. She even mentions that Elsa promised to pull out all the stops for this one, making Ars say he's really looking forward to it. The group hangs out by the table while the rest of the camp stays busy in the background, just waiting for Elsa to finally show up with the food, apologizing for keeping everyone waiting so long. She sets down a massive dish she calls the everything bowl, and it looks so good that everyone thinks it's going to be delicious. Yuria takes a bite and starts enjoying it, but then she stops to ask Elsa what kind of meat is actually in here, which makes Elsa twitch a little bit like she wasn't expecting the question. After a weird silence, Elsa just looks back and casually lets them know they're eating manticore meat. Yuria just keeps chewing with this totally blank look on her face, but she completely freezes up, looking stressed out once the reality of what she's eating finally hits her. Ars looks like he's about to lose his lunch as the thought of eating a monster finally sinks in. He turns to Elsa and asks what she was thinking serving them that, while the girl next to him freaks out because she already ate a ton of it. Elsa just closes her eyes and says it'll be fine, especially since she already tested the dish on Karen earlier. Lara says he was wondering why Karen was being so quiet, which makes her snap back and ask if he knew the truth and just let them get dragged into this. Elsa doesn't seem bothered and just explains that the recipe was a recommendation from a beastman friend of hers. She even adds that people usually say there's no way something this tasty could actually be poisonous. Yuria just keeps right on eating, saying she can't believe a monster could actually end up tasting this good. She suggests they should probably get out of there before they get caught, leaving Ars wondering if she's just brave or if her trust in Elsa is just that deep. With the meal finished, Yuria and the other girls head out to go take a bath. Ars stays behind for a second, but then something catches his eye and makes him look over. This big, muscular guy walks up and confirms if he's talking to Ars, then tells the kid he's got a question for him, and it looks like meanwhile Elsa is finally relaxing in the hot spring. She lets out a tired breath and says the day was just exhausting, but Yuria is right there with her, soaking in the water. She mentions how nice it is to be the first ones in, even though she feels a bit bad for the others who have to wait. Elsa gives a little wink and says she's sure the men are having a great time, though she's not quite so sure about ours, which just leaves Yuria looking pretty confused while Elsa just stares off into the distance. So Yuria goes quiet for a second, looking like she suddenly realized something might be going on. Back with the guys, Ars finishes explaining something and says there's definitely no doubt about it. The big guy looks completely stunned and asks if what he just heard is actually the truth, so he yells out to the rest of the group, telling everyone that the rumors they've been hearing are totally true, and the guys start losing it. One of the men from the back looks over and asks what all the noise is about, wondering what got everyone so hyped up. The big guy is sweating buckets, looking like he can barely handle the info, and he asks what else happened, because apparently he wants to know if Ars actually saw Lady Yuria and Elsa together in the bath, which makes Ars give a pretty awkward response as he remembers it. Karen is standing there with a super smug look on her face, mentioning how she didn't even believe Lara when he first told her. But now the guys are calling Ars a legend, saying he's amazing because if any of them had tried that, they'd be dead for sure, but Ars just sits there looking totally bored, telling them they're blowing things out of proportion since it wasn't even a big deal. He casually drops the fact that they really just took a bath together, acting like it's just another Tuesday, which makes the guy tell him that seeing both of them at once is actually a huge deal, and that Ars is definitely on a whole different level. So he leans in with this super intense look, desperate to know more, and asks Ars how the whole experience actually was. Ars just blinks at him, looking completely clueless, and asks the guy what he's even talking about. The guy starts losing his patience and tells Ars to stop teasing him, especially when they're talking about the bodies of those two women. Ars gets a sudden smack to the back of the head, cutting him off completely because Elsa is standing over him looking pretty annoyed, asking him what the deal was with his bath. She mentions that Karen was saying some really weird stuff, so she decided to come over and check on him, but as she looks at him, she just says she understands how things went down. Suddenly Elsa blinks in surprise, feeling something on her shoulders and wondering what's going on, since Ars is right there putting a cloak around her, telling her she's going to catch a cold if she stays wet. Elsa starts blushing like crazy and quietly thanks him, trying to be polite, though she totally loses her cool and ends up shouting the rest of her thanks while looking super flustered. She's so overwhelmed that her head starts spinning, clearly not used to him being this nice, so she tells him to just forget about it and rushes back toward the water to wash up again. Elsa looks back at him while holding her hair, reminding Ars that it's almost time for his watch. But then Ars just nods and says that's exactly why they can't go in and bathe together today, which makes Elsa's face turn bright red as she just says his name under her breath, looking totally flustered while she tells him to stop acting like they always take baths together. She looks away and tries to explain herself, saying it's not that she actually dislikes the idea, but she keeps going, telling him that he really shouldn't be so restless while they're out on an expedition since doing stuff like that sets a bad example for everyone else on the team, and she starts rushing off, telling him they should just wait until they're back home for that kind of thing. As she runs away, one of the guys nearby is just watching in total disbelief that Elsa is acting this way, so he starts calling Ars Master, and begs him to share the secret of how he pulled that off. Ars looks pretty annoyed, thinking to himself that it's going to be a huge pain if those guys keep following him around and pestering him for advice. So while the group is still cheering and calling him Sensei, he just starts walking away, telling them he's going to head out and keep watch for a bit. He makes it out into the field alone, but suddenly stops when he feels something like someone or something is watching him from the shadows, making him wonder if something is actually closing in on his position, while a massive clawed foot sits perched on the rocks nearby. Ars stands his ground in the middle of the clearing, scanning the area and trying to figure out exactly where the threat is hiding, until he finally spots it, reaching for his sword and telling the hidden creature he knew it was there because he felt a weird presence the whole time. Just then, a massive, heavy claw slams down onto the dirt right in front of him with a loud thud, and Ars doesn't even flinch, just mentioning that the thing looks like it's in a terrible mood since its pack got destroyed and asking if it's here for revenge. The giant wolf-like monster looms over him, looking surprised that Ars isn't running away, and tells him it heard he was a coward but is impressed he actually showed his face. Ars just gives a calm look, mentioning that this must be the strength Karen was so worried about, and tells the beast he's ready to see what it's actually got. The revenge wolf doesn't waste any time and swings a massive clawed paw through the air, lunging forward with enough force to tear up the ground and send rocks flying everywhere, while Ars just stands his ground, keeping a firm grip on his sword and watching the beast's every move. The monster gets right in his face, staring him down with those huge eyes, but Ars doesn't even blink, bracing himself as he catches a heavy blow directly on his blade, sparks flying from the sheer impact. The force of the strike slams into the earth, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris that covers the area. Ars drops into a low crouch amidst the wreckage, calmly mentioning that he finally sees what's going on, realizing that if he coats his clothes in enough magical energy, the rumors about them having the same defense as Mithril are actually true. He looks down at his hand, noticing it's shaking a little, and says the hit wasn't quite as strong as Karen's palm strike, but it definitely still stings. He starts thinking that if he really wants to block these attacks without feeling a thing, he probably just needs to focus on making his mana quality even better. The giant wolf stays low to the ground, eyeing Ars, who looks tiny standing right in front of it. Ars looks at the beast and says it's not bad, deciding that he'll be just fine handling things from here. He keeps his cool and mentions he actually expected a lot more, especially since Karen talked it up so much, but the wolf is the one who's really stunned, saying it can't believe a kid like him is actually this strong. Ars just shrugs it off and says there's really no point in making this fight last any longer than it has to. He plants his foot and says it's time to finally end this, instantly leaping into the air to close the gap and finish the monster off for good.